There's a specific moment that happens to a lot of people somewhere between 45 and 60, and almost nobody warns you about it. It is the moment you realize you built the wrong life, not a bad life, not a life anyone would feel sorry for. On paper, it looks like a win, but somewhere along the way, you look up and realize you built the whole thing to someone else's blueprint, and you are the one who has to live inside it. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what that moment feels like. The three quiet signals that tell you it's happening to you, and what the first real step looks like when you decide to do something about it. By the end, you'll able to tell the difference between a passing mood and bad mood and an actual signal you can't afford to ignore. If you appreciate this type of content, gently tap that like button. Let's dive into it. So, the first thing I want to clear up is what this moment is not. It is not a crush. In the movies, it's always a big dramatic scene when somebody flips a table, quits on the spot, and dives off into the sunset. This is not how it works in real life. And if you're sitting there waiting for that big cinematic breaking point to give you permission, you could be waiting for the rest of your life. The truth is much quieter than that. It arrives on an ordinary Tuesday. You are doing something completely normal, driving home, standing in the kitchen, sitting in a meeting you have sat in 100 times, and a single thought slides in from the side. Is this it? Is this really the whole thing? And then you push it down and you go back to work because there's a mortgage and there are people counting on you, and you don't have time for a thought like that. Here's the part nobody tells you. That thought doesn't leave. It just goes quiet for a while and then it comes back to a little louder. This is the most important thing I can tell you in this entire video, so I want you to really hear me. The realization that you built the wrong life is not a breakdown, it is a piece of information. It's your own mind trying to hand you something true. And most people spend years slapping that hand away because the truth is inconvenient. The people who eventually get to a life that actually fits them are not the braver than everyone else. They are just the ones who finally stopped pretending they didn't hear it. Now, let me give you the reason that hits so hard in the middle of your life, especially because there's a real mechanism behind it. When you are young and you make anonymous decisions with almost no information, you pick a path at 22, 23, 24 based on what your parents wanted, what looked safe, what would make people respect you, what would pay the bills. And those were not stupid decisions. Give what you knew. They were reasonable. But you made a long choice with a 20-year-old understanding of yourself. And then you spend the next 2 decades becoming a completely different person. The problem isn't that you choose wrong back then. The problem is that you kept honoring a promise made by someone who no longer exists. That's the gap. And around the middle of your life, that gap gets too wide to ignore. All right. So, how do we how do you think this is actually happening to you and not just a rough patch? I've narrowed it down to three signals. If you have got one, keep an eye on it. If you have got all three, this is not a mood, this is a moment. The first signal is that the weekend stopped working. For years, the deal you have made with yourself was that you did grind through the week and the weekend would recharge you. And for the long time, that deal held. But at some point, you notice the weekend isn't refilling the tank anymore. You get to the Sunday afternoon and you already feel the dread of Monday climbing up your back. And 2 days off didn't touch you. That's important because it tells you the problem isn't that you're tired. Rest fixes tired. When rest stops working, the problem is deeper than fatigue. Something structural is off, and no amount of sleeping is in going to patch it. The second signal is that you start getting weirdly emotional about other people's freedom. You see somebody who made a big change, someone who walked away and started over, and instead of feeling happy for them, you feel this hot flash of something that's almost anger. You might catch yourself being dismissive. Well, must be nice. Well, they probably had money. Well, that's easy for them to say. Pay very close attention to when you do that because that reaction is almost never about them. Envy that turns into resentment is one of the most honest signals your mind produces. It points straight at something you want and won't let yourself have. When another person's freedom makes you angry, it's because of a part of you is still in the cage and it just saw the door. The third signal is the quiet math. This is the one person that most ashamed of. So nobody says it loud. It's when you start doing the arithmetic on the years you have left. You catch yourself thinking, okay, realistically, how many good, healthy, energetic years do I actually have? And you subtract, and the number is smaller than you want it to be. And then you look at how you are spending those years, and something in your chest tightens. That's not morbid, that's your sense of time waking up. For most of your life, like the future felt infinite. So it didn't matter if a few years got spent on the wrong thing. There were always more. And then one day the future stops feeling infinite. And every year suddenly has a price tag on it. When you start counting the years, you have crossed a line. You are not asking whether you are happy anymore, you are asking whether you can afford not to be. So, those are the times the weekend stopped working. Other people's freedom make you angry, and then you start quietly counting the years. If you're sitting there recognizing yourself in all three, I want you to know that it's not a crisis. That's clarity trying to teach you. Now there's the question I get more than any other. It's a fair one. If the signals are that loud, why do people ignore them for years? Why do you? And the answer is that you're not weak. You're just running a very old survival program. Let me break down what actually keeping you stuck because you can't beat something you can't see. The first thing keeping you stuck is what people call the sunk cost trap. You have put decades into this time, money, energy, your reputation, your whole sense of who you are. And your brain looks at all of that and says, you can't walk away. You have invested too much. But the logic is backwards and it's costing people the back half of their lives. The years are already spent and gone. Either way, You do not get them back by spending more years the same way. The only real question is, what do you do with the years you still have? Staying in the wrong life to honor the time you already lost is like sitting through the rest of a terrible movie because you already paid for the ticket. The ticket money is gone. The whole thing you're deciding now is whether you also give it your afternoon. The second thing keeps you stuck in identity, and this one is deep. So I'm going to come back to it in a whole separate video because it deserves it. But the short version in this, when you have been one thing for a long time, that things stops feeling like a job and start feeling like who you are. So the idea of changing doesn't feel like changing careers. It feels like erasing yourself. And that is genuinely terrifying. And then it's a huge part of why smart, capable people stay somewhere that's slowly draining them. They are not protecting a paycheck, they are protecting a self. Quick break. If this is landing for you, check the description and the pinned comment below for helpful resource on this topic. It will make the rest of this a lot more practical. Okay, back into it. The third thing keeping you stuck is other people. And I don't mean they are the villains here. I mean you built a life around a version of yourself and someone around you got comfortable with that version. Your family, your friends, the people you rely on you. When you start to change, you are not just negotiating with yourself. You are negotiating with everyone who knew the old you. And then some of them are going to push back. Not because they are bad people, but because your steadiness is load bearing in their life too. So you stay small to keep everyone else comfortable and you call it being responsible. Sometimes it is being responsible, and sometimes it's just fear wearing a nicer outfit. Now I want to talk about permission because this is where I see the most people get stuck for the longest time. Almost everybody in this situation is waiting for permission. They are waiting for someone to tap onto the shoulder and say, "It's okay. You have suffered enough and you are allowed to want something else now." And I need to be honest with you. That person is not coming. There is no authority figure who is going to sign off on your life. The permission you keep waiting for does not exist out there. You have to issue it to yourself, and that feel almost illegal for the first time you do it because you have spent your whole life asking permission from bosses, from parents, from version of success you inherited from other people. Here's a reframe that helps. Stop asking whether you are allowed to change and start asking a harder question. What is this costing you to stay? Because staying is not free, it is not neutral. People act like staying put is the safe, responsible, risk option, and the change is the reckless gamble. That's a lie. Staying in a life that quietly eroding you has a cost too. It's cost you your energy, your health, your presence with the people you love, and years you have never getting back. When you frame it honestly, you realize you're not choosing between risk and safety. You're choosing between the different risk. The risk of changing and the risk of staying exactly the same for another 10 years. And when you say it like that, saying stops looking so safe. So let's get practical because I don't want you to close this video feeling stirred up with nowhere to put it. What does the first honest step actually looks like? Because I want to be really clear. The first step is not quitting. Anyone who tells a 50-year-old with responsibilities to just blow up their whole life and figure it out is not giving advice. They are giving you a dare, and you are too smart for that. The real first step is much smaller and much more powerful. Is to stop lying to yourself in private. That's it. Because you tell a single other person, because you make a single big move, and you just have to admit the truth to yourself and stop pretending. The first step is much smaller and much more powerful. It's to stop lying to yourself in private. That's it. Before you tell a single other person, before you make a big move, you just have to admit the truth to yourself and stop pretending. Because most people are so busy performing contentment for everyone else that they never even let themselves fully hear their own answer. So, the first honest step is to sit down alone and with no audience and answer one question truthfully. If nothing had to change tomorrow, if there were no consequences, what would I actually want my life to look like? You don't have to act on it yet. You just have to stop hiding it from yourself. The second step is to get curious instead of dramatic. Your brain wants to make this into a huge, terrifying, all or nothing leap because that's how it keeps you paralyzed. So you shrink it. You start collecting information about the thing you have drawn to quietly with zero commitment. You talk to one person who's already living same version of it. You spend a few hours learning what it would actually take. You are not betting the house. You are just turning the lights on in a room you have been afraid of. And here's what happens almost every time. The thing that felt impossibly huge in your imagination gets a lot more manageable the second you put actually information into it. Fear, fear grows in the dark. Information is the light. The third step is to buy yourself room to breathe before you need it. And I'm going to go deep on the money side of this in the very first next video because it is the price that stops more people than anything else. And it deserves real detail, not a throwaway line. But for now, just plant this seed. The goal is not to be reckless. The goal is to build enough of a cushion that when the moment comes to move, you can move from a place of choice instead of desperation. That's the whole game. Not leaping off a cliff, but quietly building a bridge. So let me bring this all the way back around. The moment you realize that you built the wrong life is not a disaster. It is the invitation. It is the most honest thing your mind had said to you in years. And the only real mistake is pretending you didn't hear it. You don't have to have it all figured out today. You don't have to have it all figured out today. You don't have to quit anything tomorrow. You just have to stop slapping away the truth every time it reaches for you. And if you want to go deeper on the piece that stops almost everyone, the money, the runaway, the actual math of how regular people walk away from a long career without wrecking their life. I made a video on exactly that. It's the honest breakdown nobody gives you, and you can check it out by clicking right here.